Hey, I'm Thomas. I read old books about strange things, angels, demons, the occult, all of it. The folks who wrote them meant every word of it, and I find that fascinating. And I hope you find it fascinating as well. If you do, feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content, give this video a like, and share it with a friend. Very much appreciated. Long before the Kabbalah became a household word, a young English rabbi named Joshua Abelson set out to map the hidden country of Jewish mysticism, the nearness of God, the mystery of the Shekinah, the luminous figure of Metatron who stands closest to the throne. Published in 1913, his study opens a door onto the Merkabah visionaries and the medieval mystics who believed the divine presence could be felt pressing at the very edge of ordinary life. I chose this because it is a rare thing, a clear, patient guide into a tradition that usually hides itself. Abelson never flattens the mystery. He lets you feel why generations risked everything to glimpse it. Come in as though through a side door into a world where heaven and earth are never quite as far apart as they seem. Jewish Mysticism, Volume 2 of 2, by Joshua Abelson, published in 1913. End.
Inference is drawn from the usage of the metaphor of a bundle of myrrh applied to my well-beloved, i.e. God. In T.B. Megillah 29a, it is stated as follows: the father of Samuel and Levi, Babylonian rabbis of the 3rd century A.D., were once sitting in the synagogue of Shephi-Yatib in Nehardea, Babylon. They suddenly heard a sound of movement. It was the Shekinah coming. They at once rose and went out. A fellow rabbi by name Shesheth, who was blind, was once sitting in the same synagogue, and when the Shekinah came, he did not go out. Then the ministering angels came and struck terror into him. In the end, Shesheth addresses the Shekinah, who advises the angels to cease from vexing him. It must be borne in mind in this connection how intimately conjoined in the minds of the rabbis was the idea synagogue with the idea Shekinah. The blending of the two even went so far as to prompt the rabbis to say what is sometimes falsely and foolishly described as grotesque, that God prays and the synagogue is his house of prayer. Hence, if it is true, as Evelyn Underhill maintains, that the visionary experience of mystics is a picture which the mind constructs from raw materials already at its disposal, mysticism, p. 325, one can quite see how the consciousness of being inside the synagogue should bring home to the rabbi in so particularly drastic a fashion the reality of the Shekinah's intercourse with men. Noteworthy also, and this is as well one of the distinguishing features of the mystical temperament, is the contrast in the effects which this sudden invasion of a divine presence had upon the objects of the visitation. The two rabbis who left the synagogue did so, most probably, as the result of the fearful weakening and depressing effect of the vision. The rabbi, however, who stayed on and succeeded in eliciting from the Shekinah a promise that the ministering angel should henceforth cease from troubling him, is the type of the mystic who feels the mental and physical elation, the joy, the rapture, the triumph consequent upon the conviction of his having, at last, reached the goal of his quest, the sight, sound, and touch of the ultimate reality. A feature of the Shekinah mysticism which deserves a deeper appreciation than is usually accorded it is to be found in the reiterated rabbinic belief that goodness and piety radiate an atmosphere of divinity which infects all who breathe it with a new impulse towards the good, the beautiful, and the true. The good man can bring the Shekinah to his fellows. He can invest earth with the quality which belongs to heaven. Sight of or contact with a saint is equivalent to an inflowing of the Shekinah. Thus, a striking passage in Canticles Rabbah V says, "The original abode of the Shekinah was among the Tachtonim, i.e. the lower ones, human beings, earth. When Adam sinned, it ascended away to the first heaven. With Cain's sin, it ascended to the second. With Enoch's to the third. With the generation of the flood to the fourth, with the generation of the Tower of Babel to the fifth, with the Sodomites to the 6th. With the sin of the Egyptians in the days of Abraham, it ascended to the 7th. Corresponding to these, there arose 7 righteous men who brought the Shekinah down back to earth again. These were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Kehath, Amram, and Moses. There is, of course, a strong sprinkling of the fellowship idea, which, as was said on a previous page, is a basic factor in Jewish spirituality. The greater the bond of union between the members of the Jewish brotherhood, the greater the realization of the divine presence in their midst. Add to this the existence of men of conspicuous piety within the bosom of the fellowship, and you have all the essentials for a deeper and stronger infiltration of the divine stream. The Shekinah is brought back to men by the aid of the better men. The same train of thought is expressed more pointedly by the following aphorisms. T.B. Barachoth 64 says, "Whosoever partakes of a meal at which a disciple of the wise is present, it is as though he enjoyed of the splendor of the Shekinah." Clearly, the presence of the disciple of the wise makes the life of the company about him to be lived on higher levels. He gives it an access to the divine which it would not otherwise have had. T.B. Ketuboth 105a says, "Whosoever brings a gift to a disciple of the wise, it is as though he brought the first fruits, Bikurim, to the temple." The disciple of the wise is here a temple in human form. To approach him is to approach a holy of holies. Contact with him is a sanctifying influence. He radiates divinity. T.B. Ketuboth 111b says, "Is it possible for any man to cling to the Shekinah? For is it not said in Deuteronomy 5:24, 'For the Lord thy God is a consuming fire'?" The meaning is this: whosoever marries his daughter to a disciple of the wise or engages in any enterprise with him, or who lets a disciple of the wise enjoy of his worldly possessions, it is counted unto him by Holy Writ as though he clung to the Shekinah. Companionship with the good must be acquired at all costs. It is the dynamic power for opening the door to the spiritual world. The man of virtue is Shekinah possessed, and to touch only the hem of his garment is to become Shekinah possessed too. When Ruth the Moabitess forsakes her ancestral gods in favor of the God of Israel, when Abram, according to the rabbinic interpretation of Genesis Tissi 5, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, brings the weary and footsore into his home and initiates them into the belief in the God in whom he himself believes. The rabbis say that the act performed in both cases is the entering of the non-Israelite under the wings of the Shekinah. The narrow, exclusive nationalist view of the deity is very apparent in these and many other similar utterances. The Shekinah is for Israel only. The Shekinah is primarily for Israel. God is near to the Jew, far from the non-Jew. These are seemingly natural and correct deductions from the rabbinic records. If so, is not the term mysticism as applied to the Shekinah a misnomer? Seeing that the primal assumption of mysticism is the truth that every soul, notwithstanding race or religion, can have intimate intercourse with the divine. The answer is this: the title Jew or Israelite is frequently used by the rabbis in a more comprehensive sense than they are usually given credit for. Thus T.B. Hare Afor Kiddushin 40a says, "Whosoever denies the truth of idolatry becomes a believer in the whole Torah." T.B. Megillah 13a says, "Whosoever denies idolatry is called a Jew." In the Midrash Sifra on Leviticus, Sefti, there is a comment on Psalm CXXV 4. "Do good, O Lord, unto those that be good, and to them that are upright in their heart." The psalmist, says the Sifra, does not say do good to the priests, or to the Levites, or to the Israelites, but he says do good unto those that be good. More instances could be quoted did space not forbid. From the first of the quotations just given, it follows that Jew is a term of the widest scope. From the second one infers that the Jew fills no higher a place in the divine favor than do the good and worthy of all men and races. Yea, he loveth the people, says the Deuteronomist 30:3. Yes, says Rabbi Samuel B. Meir, the great rabbinic commentator of the 12th century, God loveth also the nations of the world. Of King Solomon's chariot it is said, Canticles 3:10, that the midst thereof is paved with love. This love in the midst thereof, say the rabbis, is the Shekhinah. It is certainly not meant in any sectarian sense. The divine chariot in Jewish mysticism is, broadly, the idealized universe, and all degrees of creation from amoeba to man hold and reveal the traces of the divine love which is ever born anew in our hearts and which guarantees the ultimate goodness of the world. The date and origin of this extraordinary book, the oldest philosophical work in the Hebrew language, are shrouded in obscurity. There is as yet no critical edition of it, although there are several translations of it, both of the whole and of parts, into Latin, German, and French, and the numerous commentaries written on it in Arabic and Hebrew, and the subsequent translations of these into Latin, German, etc., show not only the high position which it held in the estimation of Jewish thinkers from the 10th century onward, but also the great influence which it wielded on the general development of Jewish mystical speculation. The difficulties of fixing its date and origin are illustrated by the fact that whereas the voice of medieval Jewish scholarship assigned its authorship to the patriarch Abraham on the grounds of some supposed internal evidence, individual writers here and there credited the book to Rabbi Akiba 50-130 AD, Akiba having been an adept in the mystic lore of numbers, and the book Yetzirah is pervaded with the mystical significances of numbers. Others, again, without touching the question of authorship, give it an origin in the late Talmudic epoch, about the 6th century AD. This theory is the likeliest of all because the 6th century marks the beginning of what is known in Jewish history as the Gaonic epoch, when several rabbinic mystical works second in importance only to the book Yetzirah were composed. The latest theory is that of Reitzenstein, Poimandres, pp. 14, 56, 261, 291, who, arguing from the resemblances between the doctrines of letters and numbers in this book, and the miraculous cosmic powers wielded by numbers and letters in the thaumaturgical books current among the Gnostics of the 2nd century BC, concludes that it is a Hebrew production of the 2nd century BC. The fatal objection to Reitzenstein's theory, however, seems to lie in the fact that his argument holds good of only one aspect of the work, viz., the philological part. The other part, the philosophical, although vitally connected with the philological and deduced from it, contains elements of thought and modes of expression which are many centuries later than the pre-Christian Gnosticism. But Reitzenstein's theory cuts very deeply and cannot be disposed of in a few words. The clue to the particular nature of the book Yetzirah lies in its two constituent elements which we have a moment ago contrasted. It is a mystical philosophy drawn from the sounds, shapes, relative positions, and numerical values of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The nucleus of much of this teaching is to be found in the Talmud, but the rabbis were certainly not the originators of it. Just as Philo excelled in the art of clothing Grecian philosophy in a Hebraic dress, so did the rabbis show a considerable capacity for naturalizing many an alien product. In the case of the mysticism under consideration, they drew from older available sources, Egyptian, Babylonian, Mandean, and adapted the idea to the framework of their own essential lore. Thus in T.B. Barahoth 55a there occurs the remark, Bezalel knew how to join together Letzaref, the letters by means of which the heavens and earth were created. This is because he was filled with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and understanding, Exodus, Lithdi A 3, and this wisdom is the same as that of Proverbs, Lithdi A 19, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. This belief in the magic power of the letters of the alphabet can be traced to Zoroastrianism and ultimately to Chaldea, as Lenormand has shown in his Chaldean magic. It was by means of the combination of letters comprising the holy name of God that the disciples of Judah the Prince, c. 135-220 AD, who were keen on cosmogony, used to create a 3-year-old calf on the eve of every Sabbath and used to eat it on the Sabbath. So says a passage in T.B. Sanhedrin 65b. There is a strong flavor of old Semitic witchcraft here. It is an exotic notion introduced for the purpose of intensifying an essentially Jewish belief, the belief in the wonder-working powers bestowed by the Sabbath on those who scrupulously uphold it. The practice of magic and witchcraft was sternly reprobated by the Old Testament, and the rabbis were equally severe in its condemnation. One quotation from the book will suffice to give us a glimpse into the supernatural importance of the forms, sounds, and relative positions of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet. It says 22 letters. He drew them, hewed them, combined them, weighed them, interchanged them, and through them produced the whole creation and everything that is destined to come into being. True too. Each of the actions here mentioned, viz., drawing, hewing, combining, weighing, interchanging, is described with a fullness which is as bizarre as it is bewildering. And although the interest is mainly a philological one, it is an indispensable part of the book's philosophy, as it would be impossible to give the reader any tangible notion of these involved stretches of philological reasoning without introducing a considerable amount of Hebrew words and Hebrew grammatical terminology. The subject can only be dealt with fragmentarily. The letters of the Hebrew alphabet are pressed into the service of a doctrine which is an element of ancient Semitic theosophy and which passed thence into Greek philosophy. It is the doctrine of the three primordial substances, water, fire, and air. These three substances underlie all creation and are the fountainhead of all existence. The three Hebrew letters playing the principal part in connection with these three primal substances are Aleph, A, Mem, Me, and Shin, She. Why just these letters? For two reasons. Firstly, these three letters represent three cardinal divisions into which the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet naturally fall. The divisions are mutes unaccompanied by any sound in producing them, as can be seen by anyone who tries the pronunciation of the sound of mem. It is merely a compression of the lips. Sibilants, best represented by shin, C, aspirates, the class to which Aleph belongs. This class being, in the naive imagination of these theosophists, intermediate to the mutes and the sibilants and, as it were, holding the balance between them. Hence these three letters are called mothers, mem, mother, because all the other letters are, as it were, born from them. The medieval Kabbalah, as will be mentioned later on, likewise speaks of father and mother in somewhat similar connections. Secondly, these three representative parent letters, the mute, the sibilant, the aspirate, symbolize the three basic elements of all existing things, the three primordial substances. Thus water, the first letter of which word in Hebrew is mem, is symbolized by the mute mem. Why? Because the chief product of water is fish, and fish are the representatives of the mute creation. Fire, in Hebrew esh, most prominent in pronunciation is she, is symbolized by the sibilant shin. Why? Because the characteristic of fire is its hissing sound, and the equivalent in Hebrew for sibilant is a word which means hissing. Air, the first letter of which word in Hebrew is aleph, is symbolized by the aspirate aleph, which has an airy, vacant pronunciation. Just as aleph holds the balance between the mute letters and the sibilants, so air is, in the natural world, intermediate to the water which always tends in a downward direction, and fire which by its nature always ascends. Of course, it needs no hard reasoning here to see how an alien system of very early thought has been mechanically and arbitrarily foisted onto the Hebrew alphabet. But, as was before mentioned, all the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet play a dominant role in the book's philosophy. Thus we read 2-2, by means of the 22 letters, by giving them a form and a shape, by mixing them and combining them in different ways, God made the soul of all that which has been created and of all that which will be. It is upon these same letters that the Holy One, blessed be He, has founded be His high and holy name. This remark probably indicates that the existence of these letters and the impress which they leave in every particle of creation are the unfailing source of our knowledge of that supreme intelligence which, while being immanent in the universe, is its guide and controller and holds all the different parts together. In short, the harmony of the cosmos is due to the divine wisdom underlying the manipulations of the 22 letters. These 22 letters are split up into three divisions. These are E, the three which have just been considered, the three mothers or parent letters, Aleph, Mem, Shin, which symbolize the elements, air, fire, and water, which together make up the cosmos. The year or time, which is part of the cosmos, also consists of three parts. 3 seasons, viz., summer, which corresponds to the element fire, winter, which corresponds to the element water, spring and autumn, which form a season intermediate to the other two, correspond to the element air, which also is intermediate to the fire and the water. Again, the human body is likewise a trinity, composed of head, chest, and stomach, and likewise corresponds to the 3 elements. And the world is a trinity too. Fire is the substance of the heavens, water, condensed, is the basis of earth, air is the dividing medium necessary for preserving the peace between the two. The 7 double letters typify the contraries in the cosmos, the forces which serve 2 mutually opposed ends. Thus, there are 7 planets which exercise at times a good and at times a bad influence upon men and things. There are 7 days in the week, but there are also 7 nights, and so on. It is all arbitrary and highly dubious. The 7 double letters are Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Kaf, Pei, Resh, Tau. They are double because they express 2 different sounds according as they possess Dagesh or not. The letter Resh is not usually classed among these by Hebrew grammarians. By deducting these 7 and the 3 parent letters, we get the remaining 12 simple letters. The 12 simple letters are emblematic of the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months of the year, the 12 organs in the human body which perform their work independently of the outside world and are subject to the 12 signs of the zodiac. A strong Gnostic coloring pervades the whole. Thus the cosmos, embraced ideally in the 22 letters, is an expression of the divine intelligence. Man, the world, time, these 3 constitute the cosmos, and outside them there is but one great existence, the infinite. This brings us to 2 doctrines of Jewish mysticism which appear for the first time in the book Yetzirah, and which were developed subsequently on diverse lines. These are the doctrine of emanation, the 10 Sephirot. In the general literature of mysticism, the doctrine, or rather doctrines of emanation, is usually associated for the first time with the great name of Plotinus, born at Lycopolis in Egypt, about 205 AD. This remark raises a twofold reflection which is of the highest interest. Firstly, it shows how one particularly influential aspect of mysticism, viz., emanation, is a feature common to the theologies of both the early church and the early synagogue, sundered as these two were from one another by so many other irreconcilable points of disagreement. Secondly, it shows how both Jewish and Christian mysticism are alike indebted to one and the same set of sources, viz., Gnosticism and its development, the Alexandrian Neoplatonism. The latter is the pith and core of the emanation doctrines of Plotinus. It is equally the root of the emanation doctrines of the book Yetzirah, the Zohar, and in fact, all branches of the medieval Kabbalah. Emanation implies that all existing things are successive outflowings or outgoings of God. God contains within himself all. He is perfect, incomprehensible, indivisible, dependent on nothing, in need of nothing. Everything in the cosmos, all finite creatures, animate and inanimate, flow out, radiate in a successive series from God, the Perfect One. The motif of this teaching is that of explaining the difficulties involved in the inevitable assumption of all religion, viz., that there is a bond of relationship between God and his creation. How can there be any connecting link between a being who is self-sufficient, unchangeable, infinite, perfect, and matter which is finite, changeable, imperfect, etc.? This is the difficulty. All doctrines of emanation answer it in more or less the same way, by saying that God is not really external to anyone or anything. Everything is originally comprehended in him, with no contrasts of here or there, no oppositions of this and that, no separation into change and variation. Rufus Jones, Studies in Mystical Religion, p. 73. On this understanding, there is no necessity for hunting after the missing link between the divine and the human. The multiplicity that one beholds in the cosmos, the whole panorama of thought, action, goodness, badness, the soul, the mind, all things that go to make up the pageant of man's life in the universe, are emanations, radiations from the one unity, manifestations of the God from whom all things flow and to whom they must all finally return because they are ultimately one with the One, just as the flame is one with the candle from which it issues. In the book Yetzirah, the teaching about emanation is intertwined with the doctrine of the 10 Sephirot. The object of this intertwining is that of giving a more decidedly Jewish coloring to the Neoplatonic conceptions of emanations. The Jewish mystics, however far they may have wandered into other fields for their views about God, always felt that the Hebrew Bible and God as preached by the Hebrew Bible must be the core of their message. There, thought they, lies the final truth. Final truth, taught they, is but a commentary on the Hebrew Bible. Where did the idea of the Sephirot originate? In all probability, it originated with the rabbis of the Talmud in the first 3 centuries of the Christian era. Thus, a passage in TB Hagiga 12a speaks of the 10 agencies through which God created the world, viz. Wisdom, insight, cognition, strength, power, inexorableness, justice, right, love, mercy. There are, as will be shown more fully in a later chapter, some obvious resemblances between these 10 creative potentialities of the Talmud and the 10 Sephirot of our book and of the medieval Kabbalah, though the resemblances between those of the Talmud and of the Kabbalah are considerably stronger than the resemblances between those of the Talmud and our book Yetzirah. To these facts must be added also the personification of wisdom as well as of Torah by the early rabbis, and their doctrine about the creation of the world by 2 midot attributes, viz., the attribute of mercy and the attribute of justice. Let us turn to the description of the 10 Sephirot as given by the book Yetzirah, E9. There are 10 Sephirot, 10, not 9, 10, not 11. Act in order to understand them in thy wisdom and thy intelligence, so that thy investigations exercise themselves continually upon them. Also thy speculations, thy knowledge, thy thought, thy imagination, make things to rest upon their principle and reestablish the Creator upon his foundation. Again, E8, the 10 Sephirot are like the fingers of the hand, 10 in number, 5 corresponding to 5. But in the middle of them is the knot of the unity. There is a tantalizing vagueness about these descriptions, and, as modern scholars always hasten to point out, the Sephirot of the book Yetzirah differ from those of the Zohar and the medieval Kabbalah generally in one cardinal respect, viz., that whereas in the 2 latter systems the Sephirot have the fullest possible mystical connotation, in the Yetzirah book they cluster mainly round the mysticism of numbers. Numbers and letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as we have seen, give the main impetus to the peculiar teaching. Divine action in its relation to the universe is conceived in the form of abstract numbers. But yet the following quotation from the book shows a clear foreshadowing of a real mystical system such as is seen in the Zohar. The first of the Sephirot, 1, is the Spirit, Ruach, of the living God. Blessed be his name, blessed be the name of him who inhabits eternity. The Spirit, the voice and the word, these are the Holy Spirit. The second of the Sephirot, 2, is the air which comes from the Spirit. On it are hewn and engraven the 22 letters which form altogether but one breath. The third of the Sephirot, 3, is the water which comes from the air, i.e. condensed vapor. It is in the water that he has dug the darknesses and the chaos, that he has formed the earth and the clay, which was spread out afterwards in the form of a carpet, hewn out like a wall and covered as though by a roof. The fourth of the Sephirot, 4, is the fire which comes from the water, and with which he has made the throne of his glory, the heavenly Ophanim, wheels, the seraphim, and the ministering angels. With the 3 together he has built his dwelling, as it is written, he maketh the winds his messengers, his ministers a flaming fire. Psalm, Siv 4. The remaining 6 Sephirot are the 6 dimensions of space, the 4 cardinal points of the compass, in addition to height and depth. The difficulties here are many, and some are insuperable. Are the Sephirot really a piece of Jewish mysticism, as was suggested before, or are they nothing more than echoes of the Gnostic systems of number manipulations? What is the relation between the cosmic powers of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the cosmic powers of the Sephirot? What bearing has the doctrine of the 3 primal elements upon the first 4 Sephirot, which seem to contain very much the same thought? In the answer to the first of these queries lies the clue to the nature of the book. The book Yetzirah is syncretic, and while the emphasized significance of the number 10, as well as the importance of the idea of the world as the scene of divine agencies or midot, is in its native origin Jewish, the teaching about the creative powers of letters and numbers is only Jewish by adoption, and whether the word Sephiro is originally Jewish or alien is a moot point. The notion of the three primal substances is clearly an exotic foisted onto the book to give it the appearance of the philosophic completeness which the age demanded. Viewing the book, therefore, as a mosaic rather than a concrete and continuous whole, it is futile to ask questions about the consistency of its parts. What, however, we can do and ought to do is to try to see how the author pieced his mosaic together so as to give to his readers what, in his opinion, was a presentation of the doctrine of emanation as interpreted by the spirit of Judaism. It will be noticed that the three primal substances, air, fire, water, are identical with the second, third, and fourth of the Sephirot, but whereas each of these is produced from the preceding one, the three primal substances seem to be all independent of one another as regards production. And again, the second, third, and fourth of the Sephirot all emanate originally from the first, viz., the Ruah, the spirit of the living God. No such notion attaches to the three primal substances. The object in all this seems to be that of giving an essentially Jewish coloring to cosmogony. Everything was brought forth by the Spirit of God, as the psalmist says, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. 36. It is a counterblast to the Aristotelian doctrine of the eternity of matter, which to the Jewish medieval mind was rank blasphemy. To say that everything emanates originally from the Spirit of God is tantamount to the assertion that the prototypes of matter are all of them aspects or modifications of the divine Spirit. This, again, is to put a more Jewish complexion on the doctrine of emanation, which, when carried out to its logical conclusion in the philosophy of Neoplatonism, leads to pantheism. Another pitfall which our author apparently wanted to avoid. That such a construction is a tenable one is seen from the book's remark, the last of the Sephirot unites itself to its first, just like a flame is joined to the candle, for God is one and there is no second. E5. The offense of recognizing two divine powers, Shetereshuyot, was always a terrible one to the Jewish mind. Again, all the numbers from 2 to 10 are derived from the unit, 1. Even so does all the multiplicity and variety of forms, types, etc. in the cosmos find its highest consummation, its ultimate home and goal, in the unity, viz., God. Here again we see how an alien system of number mysticism is drafted into the fold of an essentially Jewish type of mysticism, viz., that clustering round the cardinal notion of the unity of God. This theme, after being elaborated by the Talmudic rabbis of the opening centuries of Christianity, was again taken up by the medieval Jewish theologians and reached the zenith of its mystical development in the pages of the Zohar and the medieval Kabbalah generally. But what is the relation between the cosmic powers of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the cosmic parts played by the 10 Sephirot? The answer would seem to lie in the peculiar description which the book itself in one place gives to the Sephirot. The latter are, it says, 10 Sephirot without anything, Bele, in other words, abstracts. They are the categories of the universe, the forms or molds into which all created things were originally cast. They are form, as distinguished from matter. Whereas the Sephirot are responsible for the first production of form, so the 22 letters are the prime cause of matter. All existence and development are due to the creative powers of the letters, but they are inconceivable apart from the form with which the Sephirot has invested them. The book Yetzirah lands us into the heart of Jewish mysticism and prepares the way for the ramified literature of the Zohar. It does this by teaching that God and the world are a unity rather than a dualism. The Sephirot and the 22 letters of the alphabet, or in other words, the forms and essences which make up the visible universe, are all an unfolding of the divine, all emanations from the Spirit. God is at one and the same time both the matter and form of the universe. But he is something more. He is not identical with the universe. He is greater than it, transcends it. Nothing exists or can exist outside him. Though immanent, he is also and at the same time transcendent. This insistence upon the divine transcendence runs like a golden thread throughout all branches of Jewish mysticism, thus enabling it, both as a system of thought and as a phase of practical religion, to do justice at once to the legal and spiritual elements which are inextricably intertwined in Judaism. But if the book Yetzirah gave the impulse to the great books of medieval Jewish mysticism, it was eclipsed by them in one great particular. The naive conception of the mysterious powers of letters and numbers was superseded by the introduction of theological and moral ideas. The object of discussion became not so much the relationship between the Creator and his cosmos, as the relationship between God and that inner surging world of thought and emotion which we term man. How man can ascend to God whilst bound in the trammels of the flesh, or after having shuffled off this muddy vesture of decay. How God communicates himself to man, imparting to him the knowledge which has its fountainhead in his own inexhaustible being, and the love which is the seal of his abiding goodness and nearness. These themes form, roughly speaking, the staple of the Zohar mysticism which presents itself for brief consideration in the coming pages. VI. Some general features of the Zohar mysticism. The Zohar, lit shining or brightness from the word in Daniel, Shams. 3. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, is par excellence the textbook of Jewish medieval mysticism. Its language is partly Aramaic and partly Hebrew. While purporting to be but a commentary on the Pentateuch, it is in reality quite an independent compendium of Kabbalistic theosophy. Its style, its subject matter, its spirit lead the reader into realms which bear hardly any conceivable resemblance to the manner and substance of the Pentateuch. The Zohar compares well with the Talmud in one respect. They are both painfully unsystematic in the handling of their subject matter. Both present us with a bizarre medley of ideas and facts, an ill-assorted conglomeration of history and fable, truth and fiction, serious comment which has a value for all time, and observations which the march of time asks us to dismiss as outworn and valueless. Both works, too, cover a long stretch of time. The Zohar is a pseudepigraphic work. It is impossible in the present book to give the reader even the faintest outlines of the literature written by Jews of many countries and many centuries on the vexed question of the authorship of the Zohar. It pretends to be the record of a direct divine revelation to Rabbi Simeon ben Yohai, born in Galilee, 2nd century AD. And it is mainly written in the form of a series of utterances from the mouth of Simeon to his disciples, who believed him to be conveying to them the truths which he had received firsthand from heaven. Criticism has long ago demonstrated the utter untenability of this view. The Zohar made its first appearance in Spain in the 13th century, and its contents show incontestably that not alone must the work as a whole be considerably later than the 2nd century, although many an idea and doctrine certainly does go as far back as that, and further too, but that it could not possibly be the production of a single author or a single period of history. It is, like the Yetzirah book, a syncretism. Many civilizations, many faiths, and many philosophies went to the making of it. All these were, in some instances, taken in their original state and incorporated in the work, while in other instances they found room in it only after they had passed through the crucible of the Jewish mind and had thus become Judaized in the process. But that a goodly proportion of it is the development of many a doctrine embodied in the Talmud and Midrashim, there cannot be the least doubt. To ask whether this or that doctrine of Talmudic literature is indigenous to the Talmud or has its source elsewhere is, of course, quite another matter. But that it reached the Zohar from the Talmud and Midrashim and their progeny directly is certain. Where the foreign elements are drawn from is a fruitful subject of speculation amongst scholars. There is general admission, however, that Neoplatonism and Gnosticism are responsible for much, and to this must be added a newer theory which finds echoes of Persian Sufism in the Zohar. The Sufi mystics were very numerous in Persia from the 8th century onwards, and it is maintained that the Jews of Persia, influenced by Sufism, transmitted to the Jews of Spain, who were very numerous, very influential, and very distinguished in learning from the 10th to the 15th century, many mystical interpretations of esoteric tenets which in various shapes found an entrance into the Zohar. Be this as it may, we must be on our guard against following the mistaken opinion of a certain set of Jewish theologians who would have us regard the whole of the medieval Kabbalah, of which the Zohar is a conspicuous and representative part, as a sudden and strange importation from without. It is really a continuation of the old stream of Talmudic and Midrashic thought, with the admixture of extraneous elements picked up, as was inevitable, by the stream's course through many lands, elements the commingling of which must have in many ways transformed the original color and nature of the stream. The Zohar, as was said above, purports to be but a commentary on the Pentateuch. It is self-explanatory on this point. The following is a direct quotation. "Woe unto the man," says Simeon ben Yohai, "who sees in the Torah naught but simple narratives and ordinary words. For if in truth it contained only that, we should have been able even today also to compose a Torah which would be in very much another way worthy of regard." In order to find only simple statements, we should only have to betake ourselves to the ordinary legislators, among whom we could find valuable words in even greater quantity. It would suffice us to imitate them and to make a law after their words and example. But it is not thus. Every word of the Torah contains an elevated sense and a sublime mystery. Here is a direct intimation of the Zohar's emphasis upon the existence of higher truths in the Bible. It continues, "The narratives, or words of the law, are the garment of the law. Woe unto him who takes this garment for the law itself. It is in this sense that David spake, saying, Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law." Psalm CXX 18. David wished to speak of that which is hidden beneath the garment of the law. There are fools who, seeing a man covered with a beautiful garment, look no further than that, and yet that which gives a worth to the garment is his body, and what is even more precious than that, his soul. The law, too, has its body. There are precepts which one might call the body of the law. The ordinary narratives which are intermingled are the garments with which the body is covered. Simpletons have regard only to the garments or narratives of the law. The better instructed pay no regard to the garment, but to the body which it encloses. Finally, the wise, the servants of the Supreme King, they who inhabit the heights of Sinai, are concerned only with the soul, which is the foundation of all else, which is the real law. And in the time to come, they will be prepared to gaze at the soul of that soul, which breathes through the law. The mystical sense of the law, then, is its highest and truest sense. What edifice of thought does the Zohar erect on this foundation? It posits the cardinal principle that there is an esoteric as well as an exoteric reality in the phenomena of the world. The world is a series of emanations from the divine. To quote the original, he is the beginning as well as the end of all stages, darjins. Upon him are stamped atrashim, all the stages. But he can only be called one in order to show that although he possesses many forms, he is nothing other than one I full 21. Or, to give a fuller and more striking version of the same thought, before the Holy One, blessed be he, created this world, he went on creating worlds and destroying them. Whatsoever exists in this world, everything that has been in existence throughout all generations, was in existence in his presence, kameh, in all their manifold forms. I full 61. In other words, the universe is the outward expression of the inner divine thought. Everything germinated from the eternal archetypal divine idea. Or as it is put in another way, he made this world of below to correspond with the world of above. Everything which is above has its pattern here below, and all constitutes a unity, I full 20. What the Zohar thus aims at teaching us is, that man, having the privilege to behold everywhere the divine image, the world being an embodiment of God, can, if he will, make his way to the invisible author of all, can have union with the unseen. Whatsoever belongs to the domain of the spirit thrusts itself forward and is visible, Tosh. The universe is divine spirit materialized, and it is given to man to have contact with it. The rabbis of the Talmud and Midrashim had an idea of a sort of image of God which is immanent in the universe. Thus, a passage in the Tanhuma on Genesis 34 says, "If a mortal king engraves his image upon a tablet, the tablet is greater than the image. But God is great, and yet his image is greater than the whole world." But it is only fair to add, and it bears out the remark already made about the curious mixture of ingredients which make up the Zohar, that in conjunction with this high note of thought, there is another note which strikes the modern reader as being of a pitifully inferior nature. The juxtaposition is deplorable. We are presented with an almost unintelligible mass of medieval astrology. Thus, in the firmament above which covers all things, signs are engraven in which are fixed hidden things and secrets. These marks are those of the constellations and the planets. Tosh 474. Here is a tiny quotation representative of a huge quantity of the Zohar's material. "He who has to set out on a journey in the morning must rise at the break of day and must look towards the east. He will behold letters moving in the heavens, one ascending and another descending." These brilliant forms are those of the letters with which God created the heaven and the earth. They form his mysterious and holy name, Sivid Shi. This looks very much like a mixture of Pythagorean theories of letters with medieval astrological notions. When the spirits and the souls come out of Eden, Zohar, like all the Kabbalah, abundantly teaches the pre-existence of souls, here reflected in the face, which later on is reflected in the face, 73. From this, all sorts of the strangest facts of physiognomy are seriously deduced. In a work which professes to draw its substance from the secret and esoteric aspect of the Old Testament, and which, as we have said, makes the seen world so much akin to the unseen, it is only to be expected that angelology should fill an important place. The impetus to much of it is directly given by a saying of the Talmud to the effect that the righteous are greater than the ministering angels, TB Sanhedrin 93a. This idea is just of a piece with the general drift of the Zohar, for by its theories of emanation, and by its insistence on the idea of the macrocosm, or of the world as being an evolution of the image of God and of man as a small copy of the world, a microcosm, it cannot but make man as the center, the crown, and consummation of all creation. Hence man must rank above the angels. It is important to observe the framework of thought into which the Zohar fits its ideas on the relative positions of angels and men in the microcosm. The world is a manifestation of the divine, as the materialized expression of God's immanent activity, is really made up of four component parts, or worlds as the Kabbalah always styles them. These are Thai, the world of Azalut, or emanation; Thai, the world of Bariah, i.e. creative ideas; Thai, the world of Yetzirah, or creative formations; Thai, the world of Asiya, or creative matter. The first term, Azalut, is based on the Hebrew verb azal in Numbers, he, 17. "And I will take of the Spirit which is upon thee, and will put it upon them." The second, third, and fourth terms are derived from the three Hebrew verbs in Isaiah, he, 7, I have created, I have formed, I have made. The world of Azalut constitutes the domain of the 10 Sephiros, which will be considered in our next chapter. The world of Bariah holds the divine throne which emanates from the light of the Sephiros, also the souls of the pious. The world of Yetzirah is the scene of the divine halls, Hekalots, the 7 heavenly halls guarded by angels, into which the ecstatic seekers for the Merkabah chariot strive to gain admission. The angels have their abode there, presided over by Metatron, and there also are the souls of ordinary men, as distinguished from the pious. In the world of Asir are the lower order of angels, the Ophanim, whose business it is to combat evil and to receive the prayers of men. Thus, seeing that the hierarchy of angels only begins with the third world, whereas the souls of the pious belong to the second world, the position of man in the divine evolution is superior to that of the angel. The idea of the active part thus played by angels in the emanation worlds of Jewish medieval mysticism is primarily derived from such Old Testament verses as "He maketh his angels winds, AV spirits, his ministers a flaming fire," Psalm, Civ 4, which has already been quoted in a similar connection before. But suppose we attempt to rationalize the old world allegorical language. What constructions will we place upon these angelic activities in the scheme of man and the universe? Much light is shed on the subject by the fact of the decisive names which are accorded to the angels, names which denote missions. Thus Rachmiel is the angel of mercy, Tahariel is the angel of purity, Pediel is the angel of deliverance, Sedkiel is the angel of justice, Raziel is the angel who guards the divine secrets. Metatron is the master of all these, and it has been shown in a previous chapter how closely Metatron is allied to the deity, playing in the world a role akin to that of the deity. The inference from all these statements is that every particle of the natural world, every shred of man's organism, is saturated with some manifestation or other of the divine will which is goodness and truth and love and justice made manifest and real. It is this impregnable force underlying all phenomena that preserves the world in its course, and that makes its manifold and variegated parts work in harmonious relations. But what about the existence of sin and evil? How can their existence be justified in a world such as the Zoharic mysticism implies, a world which is a series of emanations from the divine, a world wherein God is eternally and intimately present in its every part, because the whole is but a manifestation of himself? If all things, i.e., everything good and everything evil, are similarly and equally phases of the same divine life, then the distinction between good and evil becomes meaningless. But to affirm this is to deny the first principles of both religion and morality. It is the quagmire of pantheism. Does the Zohar lead to any pantheistic conclusion? If not, how does it evade the difficulty? The reply to these queries is that the Zohar steers clear of the dangers of pantheism, and that it solves the problem of evil in a way which, while appearing highly unsatisfactory to the modern scientific Western mind, is quite in keeping with the intellectual level of the times in which its writers lived. Evil, sin, and their personifications, the demons, are termed kili forth, i.e. the coverings, wrappings, externals of all existing things. Just as the covering or husk of anything is not the real thing and far inferior to it, so sin and evil are, as it were, the gross, inferior, imperfect aspects of creation. And as the world is an emanation of the divine, it follows that whatsoever in the world is evil and not of the divine cannot be real. Hence, evil is that which has no being. It is a sort of illusion. It is a state of absence, negation. It is a thing which merely appears to be but is not. It is symbolized, according to the Zohar, by the condition of the primeval chaos as described in Genesis E2, viz. Without form, void, darkness, i.e. absence of all visible form, order, life. By means of the creation of the world, which is an emanation of the divine, the infinite became, as it were, contracted, tzimtzum, and took on certain attributes of the finite. To this finite belongs the darkness of the first chaos, or in other words, evil. Hence the finite stands at the uttermost extremity of the divine emanation, i.e., the world. And as it is man's duty to strive after union with the infinite, his pursuit of the finite leads him to that which lies at the extremity of the divine nature, rather than that which lies at the heart of it. This constitutes evil. It is a state of absence, a negation. Because man, who, like the universe, is but one of the manifestations of the divine, can only attain the real when he seeks the real who is his fount, his home. It is of interest and vital to an understanding of all Kabbalistic literature to note some of the favorite technical terms employed in addition to those already here mentioned in passing. A ubiquitous term is En Sof, applied to the deity. These words mean literally no end. The deity is boundless, endless. The Zohar was not the first mystical work to use the words. The underlying idea was probably supplied by the idea underlying the description of the Godhead in the philosophy of Ibn Gabirol, the Spanish-Hebrew poet and mystic philosopher of the 11th century. He describes the deity as the She'en tu tikla, i.e., the one who has no bounds or ends. Ibn Gabirol was a Neoplatonist, and much of his philosophy shows the influence upon him of Plotinus. But he forsakes his master and follows strictly in the line of Jewish tradition in one respect, viz., that in order, as he thought, to safeguard the Jewish doctrine of monotheism, the deity must be freed from the ascription to him of all attributes. Hence, God can only be properly described by a title which emphasizes the negation of all attributes. The Ein Sof of the Zohar and its predecessors is probably an echo of this ultra-negative characterization of the deity. Let us quote the Zohar. Before having created any shape in the world, before having produced any form, he was alone, without form, resembling nothing. Who could comprehend him as he then was before creation, since he had no form? It is forbidden to picture him by any form or under any shape whatsoever, not even by his holy name, nor by a letter, nor by a point. Yad, Yerusali, Shupt, Jupandu, with stigzonated as a point. Such is the sense of the words, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day when the Lord spake unto you in Horeb, out of the midst of the fire. Jude I 15. This means that you saw no other thing which you might possibly represent by a form or shape. But after he had created the form of the heavenly man, Adam Elah, he used him as a chariot, Merkabah, on which to descend. He wished to be called by the form which consists of the holy name of Javeh. He wished to make himself known by his attributes, by each attribute separately. So he let himself be styled as the God of pardon, the God of justice, the God omnipotent, the God of hosts, and he who is Javeh. His object was to make thus intelligible what are his qualities and how his justice and his compassion extend over the world as well as over the works of men. For had he not shed his brightness over all his creatures, how would we get to know him? How would it be true to say that the world is filled with his glory? Woe unto the man who would dare to compare him to even one of his own attributes. Yet still less ought he to be likened unto the man who came from the earth and who is destined for death. It is necessary to conceive of him as above all creatures and all attributes. And then, when these things have been removed, there is left neither attribute, nor shape, nor form. Ephol 42. From this characteristic extract, the following deductions are possible. God is the Ein Sof, and as a being utterly divested of attributes, is an idea that can only be postulated negatively. You cannot tell what God is, you can only tell what he is not. But if this be so, and if, as is axiomatic to the Zohar and all the Kabbalah, the world is contained in God just as a small vessel is contained in a larger, and nothing exists outside of God, how can creation be explained? Whence and how arose the universe? The universe is imperfect and finite, and its creation must have involved, therefore, some change in the character of God, who ex hypothesi is perfect, free from all attributes, and therefore free from all possibility of change. How could this be? The answer is contained in the Zohar's teaching on the 10 Sephirot, which will be considered in our coming chapter. The idea of God using the heavenly man, Adam Ilah, as a chariot on which to descend indicates a noteworthy identity of teaching in the Zohar and Plotinus. For both systems imply that there is a sort of double movement in the universe, a way down and a way up. There is a process of divine emanation, i.e., an outgoing of God, a self-descent from his transcendent height towards the lowly abodes of man, and correspondingly there is an ascent, a way up, on the man's part. For, just as to Plotinus, the final stage of the soul's return journey to its home in God consists in its highest experience, brought about by a withdrawal from desires and from objects of sense, of contact and union with God, so also, according to the Zohar, the three elements of which the soul is composed, viz., the rational neshama, the moral ruah, and the vital nefesh, are each of them not only emanations from the Sephirot, but also have the potency of uniting him again with the Sephirot, and, in the case of the pious man, of uniting him with the highest of the Sephirot, the crown or supreme intelligence. The idea of the heavenly man, or Adam Kadmon, first or original man, or Shashinta Tata, lower or terrestrial Shashina, is vital to an understanding of the Zohar and of all Kabbalistic literature. It has resemblances to the Philonic exegesis on the distinction between the heavenly man born in the image of God, and therefore having no participation in any corruptible or earth-like essence, and the earthly man who was made of loose material called a lump of clay, on the allegories of the sacred laws I-12. One thinks also in this connection of Paul's views on the first Adam who was flesh and blood, a living soul, and the second Adam whom he describes as a quickening spirit, 45-49. There is, too, a rabbinic dictum about a spirit of Adam which moved upon the face of the waters, as did the Ruah in Genesis, I-2. A pre-existent first man. The Zohar is possibly indebted for its treatment of the heavenly man to some one or perhaps all of these sources. It says as follows: the heavenly man, after he had manifested himself from out of the midst of the upper world primitive obscurity, created the earthly man, E70-fold. This means that the creation of man was the work not of God, but of his supreme manifestation, his first emanation. This manifestation or emanation is the first of the 10 Sephirot, the crown, which, as will be shown later, is the primal will of God, which contained within itself the plan of the universe in its entire infinity of time and space. To say that the plan of the world in its entirety is contained in one of the emanations of God is tantamount to saying that man, who is part of the world, is the product of an immanent divine activity in the world. This immanent divine activity is denoted by the term heavenly man, as also by the term first of the Sephirot, and in varying senses by all the 10 Sephirot. But why, after all, such a title as heavenly man? It is because, according to the Zohar, man is a copy of the universe below as well as, or the universe above. Hence God in his creative capacity chose also the form of man. The Zohar puts it thus: believe not that man consists solely of flesh, skin, bones, and veins. The real part of man is his soul, and the things just mentioned, the skin, flesh, bones, and veins, are only an outward covering, a veil, but are not the man. When man departs, he divests himself of all the veils which cover him, and these different parts of our body correspond to the secrets of the divine wisdom. The skin typifies the heavens, which extend everywhere and cover everything like a garment. The flesh puts us in mind of the evil side of the universe. The bones and the veins symbolize the divine chariot, the inner powers of man, which are the servants of God. But they are all but an outer covering. For inside man, there is the secret of the heavenly man. Everything below takes place in the same manner as everything above. This is the meaning of the remark that God created man in his own image. But just as in the heavens, which cover the whole universe, we behold different shapes brought about by the stars and the planets to teach us concerning hidden things and deep secrets, so upon the skin which covers our body there are shapes and forms which are like planets and stars to our bodies. All these shapes have a hidden meaning and are observed by the sages who are able to read the face of man, 276a. 7. The 10 Sephirot. All finite creatures are, in divergent senses and varying degrees, part and parcel of the deity. Creatio ex nihilo is unthinkable, seeing that God in the Neoplatonic view is the perfect one, an undivided one, to whom no qualities or characteristics can be ascribed, and to whom therefore no such idea as that of intention or purpose or change or movement can be applied. All existences are emanations from the deity. The deity reveals himself in all existences because he is immanent in them. But though dwelling in them, he is greater than they, he is apart from them. He transcends them. The foregoing might be said to be a general resume of the philosophy of the 10 Sephirot. To quote a passage from the section of the Zohar called the Idra Zuta, Small Assembly, the most ancient one is at the same time the most hidden of the hidden. He is separated from all things, and is at the same time not separated from all things. For all things are united in him, and he unites himself with all things. There is nothing which is not in him. He has a shape, and one can say that he has not one. In assuming a shape, he has given existence to all things. He made 10 lights spring forth from his midst, lights which shine with the form which they have borrowed from him, and which shed everywhere the light of a brilliant day. The ancient one, the most hidden of the hidden, is a high beacon, and we know him only by his lights which illuminate our eyes so abundantly. His holy name is no other thing than these lights. The 10 lights are, of course, the 10 Sephirot, the 10 successive emanations from the Godhead, the 10 powers or qualities which were latent from all eternity in the Godhead. But what is meant by saying that his holy name is no other thing but these lights? We turn to another passage in the Zohar for the explanation. It reads as follows. The name I am, Ehiye, see Exodus, E'eri, C-E-Eri, C-E-Eri, C-A-Eg. 14. I am that I am. In Hebrew, Eheye, Eheye, Asher Eheye, signifies the unity of all things. Afterwards he brought out that light which is the celestial mother, and when she bare a child, then he called himself that I am, Asher Eheye. And when all else came into existence, and everything became perfected and in its right place, then he called himself Javeh, 65. The passage seems hopeless as regards a meaning, but on deeper consideration it becomes quite clear. The divine name, I am that I am, is inferior to the divine name Javeh. It typifies an earlier, less developed stage. The student of Hebrew will readily know why this is. Although translated into English as I am that I am, it belongs grammatically to what the Semitic philologists call the imperfect tense, representing an unfinished action. But Javeh is grammatically the present tense, i.e. a noun formed from this tense. Hence, I am that I am signifies the Godhead as he was when he existed as the hidden of the hidden, i.e. when he was the undivided one, the absolute containing in himself the all, before he had, so to speak, unfolded himself in his creative acts, before any emanations had radiated out from him. But Javeh denotes the crown and summit of the divine self-manifestation. In other words, it denotes God as immanent in all the numberless parts of the cosmos, which is but a revelation, an embodiment of the divine thought. The idea of the celestial mother having a child is part of the Zohar's doctrine of emanation, where, as will be shown later on, a certain one of the 10 Sephirot is called Father, Abba, and another is called Mother, Imma. And from the union of the two there is born another of the Sephirot called the Son, Ben. Hence to say that God's holy name is no other thing than these lights is but to say that the Sephirot, which represent the world as the copy of an ever-active, ever-energizing God, sum up all that the divine name stands for, and that the divine name denotes a strongly mystical aspect of the relation between God and the universe is abundantly clear from the Essenic literature, as well as from the book Yet Sirah. In fact, it appears occasionally in this sense in the Talmudic and Midrashic records, see Igi Pesahim 55b, and the germ of the idea can be traced back to the Old Testament, to such phrases as, "This is my name forever," and "This is my memorial unto all generations," Exodus, Eri 15, or "Thy name, O Lord, endureth forever, and thy memorial, O Lord, throughout all generations," Psalm 6 of 13. One of the clearest passages in the Zohar stating what the 10 Sephirot are is the following. For the waters of the sea are limitless and shapeless, but when they are spread over the earth, then they produce a shape, dimion, and we can calculate like this. The source of the waters of the sea and the force which it emits to spread itself over the soil are two things. Then an immense basin is formed by the waters, just as is formed when one makes a very deep digging. This basin is filled by the waters which emanate from the source. It is the sea itself, and can be regarded as a third thing. This very large hollow is split up into 7 canals, which are like so many long tubes, by means of which the waters are conveyed. The source, the current, the sea, and the 7 canals form together the number 10. And should the workmen who constructed these tubes come to break them up, then the waters return to their source, and there remains naught but the debris and the water dried up. It is thus that the cause of causes has created the 10 Sephirot. The crown is the source whence there springs a light without end, from which comes the name En Sof, i.e. infinite, designating the supreme cause. For while in this state it possesses neither shape nor figure, there are no means of comprehending it. There is no way of knowing it. It is in this sense that it has been said, "Seek not the things that are too hard for thee." Ecclesiasticus A 21. Then there is formed a vessel contracted to a mere point, Yod, the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, into which the divine light penetrates. It is the source of wisdom. It is wisdom itself, in virtue of which the supreme cause is called the God of wisdom. Afterwards, it constructs a channel, wide as the sea, which is called intellect, intelligence. From this comes the title of God who understands, A is intelligence. We must know, however, that God only understands and is wise by means of his own essential substance. For wisdom does not merit the title by itself, but only by the instrumentality of him who is wise and who has produced it from the light which emanates from him. One cannot conceive what knowing is by itself, but by him who is the knowing one, and who fills it with his own essential substance. Finally, the sea is divided into 7 parts, and there result the 7 precious channels which are called compassion, or greatness, justice, or force, beauty, victory, glory, royalty, and foundation. It is for this reason that God is called the great, or the compassionate, the strong, the magnificent, the God of victories, the Creator to whom all glory belongs, and the foundation of all things. It is this latter attribute which sustains all the others, as well as the totality of the worlds, and yet he is also the King of the universe. For all things are in his power, whether he wills to lessen the number of the channels and increase the light which springs from them, or whether he wills the contrary, full 42:43. According to this characteristic passage, the Sephirot are the names of the deity, but only in the deeply mystical sense of names as has been referred to above. The divine name is, on this understanding, equivalent to the presence of God, the eternal source of the power and intelligence enshrined in the constitution of the world and the heart of man. The 10 Sephirot together are thus a picture of how an infinite, undivided, unknowable God takes on the attributes of the finite, the divided, the knowable, and thus becomes the cause of, the power lying at the bottom of, all the multifarious modes of existence in the finite plane, all of which are thus a reflection of the divine. The Sephirot have no real tangible existence at all. They are but a figure of speech showing the divine immanence in all cosmic phenomena, in all the grades of man's spiritual and moral achievement. It should, however, be pointed out here that the functions and natures of the Sephirot are described by the Zohar in the most enigmatic of enigmatic language. Hence different deductions have always been possible, and hence, too, the rise of more than one school of Zohar interpretation. The view mostly followed, and it may be said to be the universally accepted standard, is that of the school of Luria and Cordovero, the 2 most famous Kabbalists of the 16th century. Let us now consider each of the Sephirot separately. What we shall say will amount in substance, though not in form, to a commentary on the lengthy passage from the Zohar previously quoted. Prior to the first of the Sephirot must come what our extract has termed the supreme cause, literally the cause of causes, or the Ein Sof. What is the relation of the Ein Sof to the Sephirot? According to the theories of Luria and Cordovero, all the Sephirot emanate from the Ein Sof, who, although eternally present in them all, is not comprehended in them, but transcends them. All modes of existence and thought embody some fragment of the Ein Sof. But with all this, the Ein Sof is divided from them by an impassable gulf. He remains the hidden, unapproachable being. This is why, while each of the Sephirot has a well-known name, the Ein Sof has no name. Just as in the Talmudic mysticism of the Shekhinah, the idea of a universally diffused, all-penetrating deity is conveyed by the metaphor of light, so in the case of the medieval Kabbalah, the Ein Sof is likewise spoken of as light, or Ein Sof, the infinite light. The Christian mystics also favored the same figure. Closely connected with this teaching is the general Kabbalistic doctrine of Tzimtzum, i.e. contraction. It too is found in the Talmud and Midrashim, and it is from them that the Kabbalah most likely received it. Thus, Genesis Rabbah Eve 5 dwells on the paradox mentioned also by Philo of the world being too small to hold God, but yet the space between the arc's staves being large enough. The Kabbalistic idea of Tzimtzum is an attempt to explain the contraction or limitation of the Ein Sof, the infinite, in order to make possible the emanation of the Sephirot, in order to produce the finite world of phenomena. The universal infiltration of the light of the Ein Sof, its diffusion throughout all the Sephirot, gave rise to the idea of the existence of a changeable and an unchangeable element in each of the Sephirot. The former represents the material, outward, perishable side of man and the universe. The latter is the changeless, unfading, eternal quality embedded in man and the universe. It is just this dual aspect which is referred to in the long extract from the Zohar quoted above. In the words, "Should the workmen who constructed these tubes come to break them up, then the waters return to their source, and there remains naught but the debris and the water dried up." In other words, should the Ein Sof withdraw its eternal immanent light and life from any one of the Sephirot, or to speak in untechnical language, should God, who is the life of the universe, the power lying beneath and behind all phenomena, by some miraculous intervention withdraw or suspend some fragment of himself, then the cosmos reverts to chaos. The first of the 10 Sephirot is the crown, in Hebrew, Keter. It is of importance for the reader to note that whereas Neoplatonism is largely responsible for the basis of the Zohar's doctrines of emanation, the names of the Sephirot and the teaching embraced and conveyed by those names are entirely drawn from the field of the Old Testament and rabbinical theology. All ages of Jewish thought, as well as of Jewish art, employ the word, image, and idea of a crown in a considerable variety of senses. In biblical Hebrew, there are no less than 5 different words, all indiscriminately translated as crown, but denoting really either different forms of the thing or different prominent portions of it. In the apocryphal and rabbinical literature, men crowned themselves in all sorts of ways, and the crown was symbolic of a host of religious ideas. In the theological realm, crown played many parts. Only 2 references, both germane to our subject, can be quoted here. In T.B. Barakoth 17a, it is said, "In the world to come there is neither eating nor drinking, nor marrying, nor bargaining, nor envy, nor hatred, nor quarrel, but the righteous sit with crowns upon their heads, and feed upon the splendor of the Shekinah, as it is said of the nobles of the children of Israel. He laid not his hand upon them, but they saw God," and this was equivalent to their eating and their drinking, so the Targumic paraphrase of 4th 11. T.B. Megillah 15b says, "In the time to come, God will be a crown of glory upon the head of each saint, as it is written, In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory, and for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people." Isaiah 5. Hence, it is not hard to discover by what process of reasoning the medieval Jewish mystics thought it fitting to designate the first of the Sephirot as the crown. "It is," says the Zohar, "the principle of all principles, the hidden wisdom, the crown which the highest of the high, and by which all crowns and diadems are crowned. It is the first of the emanations from the Ein Sof, the latter being, as has been said above, the infinite, hidden, unknowable being. The crown represents, as it were, the first stage by which the infinite being takes on the properties of the finite and becomes drawn out of his impenetrable isolation. But nevertheless, the crown is an absolute indivisible unity, possessing no attributes or qualities, and baffling all analysis and description. It is, to quote the original, a nekuda peshtua, i.e. a simple point, or nekuda rishona, i.e. a primordial point. The idea here is that the first manifestation of the divine is a point, i.e. unity, unanalysable, indescribable, and yet possessing the all. In other words, it is the Hegelian idea of pure being, das reine Sein. This pure being or existence is the thought or reason of God. The starting point of everything is the thought as it existed in God. The universe is this thought of God. It is in this thought of God that everything was originally embraced. The first of the Sephirot denotes then the primordial divine thought or divine will, as the Hebrew commentators often style it, And to say this is tantamount to saying that the crown contained within itself the plan of the universe in its infinity of time and space, in its endless varieties of form, color, and movement. And it is an emanation from the Ein Sof, who, while immanent in the crown, and hence immanent in all the Sephirot, yet transcends them all. The crown, for the reasons just mentioned, is ofttimes styled Resha Hivra, i.e. the white head denoting the idea of source, and white being the blend of all the colors, just as the crown is the blend of all forms in the cosmos. But the idea may possibly be drawn from Daniel, VAE Tone 9, where one that was ancient of days did sit. His raiment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, in CF 1822, Revelation I-14. The original Aramaic for Ancient of Days is Attic, and this too is a name for the first of the Sephirot, and is frequently employed in the Kabbalah, generally as a designation of the deity. Wisdom and intelligence are the second and third of the 10 Sephirot. They are parallel emanations from the crown or first Sephirah. Here we alight upon an interesting feature of this mysticism, viz., the application of the idea of the sexual relationship to the solution of the problem of existence. When the Ancient One, the Holy One, desired to bring all things into being, he created them all as male and female. Wisdom is the father, i.e. the masculine active principle which engenders all things and imposes on them form and measure, an idea derived from Job Ixeth 8e12. Intelligence is the mother, the passive receptive principle derived from Proverbs Sirach Hes 3. Yea, if thou cry after discernment, i.e. Bina in Hebrew, and the word rendered by if can, by the slightest alteration of a vowel, be rendered by mother, and thus the passage is translated by the Zohar as, Yea, if mother thou tallest discernment. Out of the union of wisdom and intelligence comes a son who is dowered with the characteristics of both parents. This son is reason, Data, which is, by the way, not regarded as an independent Sephirah. These three, father, mother, son, i.e. the two Sephirot, viz., wisdom and intelligence, and their offspring reason, hold and unite in themselves all that which has been, which is, and which will be. But they in their turn are all united to the first Sephirah, the crown, who is the all-comprehensive one who is, was, and will be. Here one meets again with a foreshadowing of the Hegelian teaching concerning the identity of thought and being. The universe is an expression of the ideas or the absolute forms of intelligence. Cordovero says, the first three Sephirot must be considered as one and the same thing. The first represents knowledge, the second the knower, the third that which is known. The Creator is himself, at one and the same time, knowledge, the knower, and the known. Indeed, his manner of knowing does not consist in applying his thought to things outside him. It is by self-knowledge that he knows and perceives everything which is. There exists nothing which is not united to him and which he does not find in his own essence. He is the type of all being, and all things exist in him under their most pure and most perfect form. It is thus that all existing things in the universe have their form in the Sephirot, and the Sephirot have theirs in the source from which they emanate. Thus, the first three Sephirot form a triad constituting the world as a manifestation of the divine thought. The remaining 7 Sephirot likewise fall into triads. The divine thought is the source whence emanate 2 opposing principles, one active or masculine, the other passive or feminine. The former is mercy, Hesed. The latter is justice, Din. From the union of these two there results beauty, Tefireth. The logical connections between these 3 principles as they stand in the Zohar are extremely difficult to fathom. But Cordovero and other Hebrew commentators give us the needed solution of the problem. The Sephirot mercy and justice represent the universe as being at one and the same time an expansion and contraction of the divine will. Mercy, as the active masculine principle, is the life-giving, ever-productive, because ever-forgiving power innate in man and the universe. Justice is the necessarily opposed immanent faculty holding in check what would otherwise prove to be the excesses of mercy. The theology of the Talmudic rabbis shows itself unmistakably here. In the beginning, say the rabbis, God thought to create the universe by the attribute of justice, designated by the word Javeh. But on considering that the universe could not exist by justice alone, he determined to join the attribute of mercy, designated by the word Elohim, with the attribute of justice, and to create the universe as he finally did by the dual means. Likewise, in the Zohar mysticism, the moral order of the universe can only follow on a combination of the Sephirot mercy and justice, and the inevitable product of the union is the sixth Sephirah, beauty. The reasoning is apparent. We have thus far seen how the first triad of Sephirot pictures God as the immanent thinking power of the universe, and how the second triad interprets God as the immanent moral power of the universe. The third triad are victory, nezach, glory, hod, and foundation, yesod. The first of these is the masculine active principle. The second is the feminine passive principle, while the third is the effect of their combination. What aspect of a God-saturated world do these three Sephirot point to? The Zohar tells us as follows: extension, variety, a multiplication, and force are gathered together in them, and all forces that come out from them, and it is for this reason that they are called hosts, armies, or forces. They are victory and glory, arshtron. The allusion is obviously to the physical, dynamic aspect of the universe, the ceaseless, developing world with its multiplicity and variety of forces, changes, and movements. From their coalescence comes the ninth Sephirah, foundation. Rightly so, for it is the endless, changeless ebb and flow of the world's forces that, in the last resort, guarantees the stability of the world and builds up its foundation. It creates the reproductive power of nature, endows it with, as it were, a generative organ from which all things proceed and upon which all things finally depend. The last of the Sephirah is royalty, malkut. Its function is not very apparent, and its existence may be due to the desire on the part of the Kabbalists to make up the number 10, a number which looms largely in the Old Testament literature, as well as in the theology of the Talmud, Midrashim, and Philo. Generally speaking, this 10th Sephirah indicates the abiding truth of the harmonious cooperation of all the Sephirot, thus making the universe in its orderliness and in its symmetry a true and exact manifestation of the divine mind, an olam azilut, i.e., a world of emanation, as the Kabbalists themselves style it. The fact that the Sephirot fall into triads or trinities, and the ascription to them of such sexual titles as Father, Mother, Son, has encouraged many an apologist for Christianity to say that the essential Christian dogma of the Trinity is implicit in the Jewish mystical literature, but it is beyond a doubt that the resemblance is quite a matter of accident. It cannot be too often repeated that there is a substantial admixture of foreign elements in all branches of the Kabbalah. The philosophy of Solomon ibn Gabirol, which largely echoes Plato, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Philinism, and other systems have all left indelible traces. But Christianity, be it remembered, besides being a debtor to Judaism, is a debtor to these sources as well, so that what appears to be Christian may be in reality Jewish, a development of the original material by an unbroken succession of Jewish minds. This original material is the old Talmudic and Midrashic exegesis upon which was foisted the alien philosophies just alluded to. That there should be a resultant resemblance to Christianity is quite a normal outcome, but it is beyond dispute that the Christian Trinity and the Trinities of the 10 Sephirot lie in quite distinct planes. The Jewish prayer book echoes much of the theological sentiment of the Zohar. There is a fine hymn in the Sabbath morning service, which, while giving a noteworthy prominence to the names of the Sephirots, reproduces with a charming simplicity of Hebrew diction the main body of the Zoharic doctrine, its cosmology, angelology, astrology, and psychology. It is as follows, Founder Ref 11. God, the Lord over all works, blessed is he, and ever to be blessed by the mouth of everything that hath breath. His greatness and goodness fill the world. Knowledge, da'at, and understanding, tabuna, bina, surround him. He is exalted above the holy Hayot, and is adorned in glory, kabod, hod, above the celestial chariot, Merkabah. Purity and rectitude are before his throne, loving kindness, hesed, and tender mercy before his glory. The luminaries are good which our God hath created. He formed them with knowledge, understanding, and discernment. He gave them might and power to rule in the midst of the world. They are full of luster, and they radiate brightness. Beautiful is their luster throughout all the world. They rejoice in their going forth, and are glad in their returning. They perform with awe the will of their master. Glory and honor they render unto his name, exultation and rejoicing at the remembrance of his sovereignty, Malkut. He called unto the sun, and it shone forth in light. He looked and ordained the figure of the moon. All the hosts on high render praise unto him, the seraphim, the Ophanim, and the holy Hayot, ascribing glory, lit beauty, Hais, Tefireth, and greatness. As in all systems of mysticism, the soul plays a towering part in the theology of the Zohar. Mysticism's center of gravity is the close kinship between the human and the divine, and the only avenue through which this kinship can become real to us is the soul. The soul, as a spiritual entity playing the highest of high parts in man's relation with the unseen, is not a conspicuous element of either the Old Testament or the Talmudic Midrashic writings. And the critics of Judaism have a way of saying harsh things about that religion on the grounds of its deficiency in this respect. But the shortcoming is amply atoned for by the large part assigned to the function of the soul in all branches of the medieval Kabbalah. That the Zohar is a debtor to a double source, the Talmudic teachings and the teachings of the Neoplatonists, is very apparent from its treatment of the soul. A passage from the former reads as follows: Just as the soul fills the body, so God fills the world. Just as the soul bears the body, so God endures the world. Just as the soul sees but is not seen, so God sees but is not seen. Just as the soul feeds the body spiritually, intellectually, so God gives food to the world. 10a, the predominant influence of the soul over the body. The body is overflown in all its parts by the soul and dependent upon it for the source of its life. These are the implications of the passage just quoted, and they are the substratum of the Zoharic ideas of the soul. Neoplatonism gave to the Zohar the idea of the soul as an emanation from the overmind of the universe. There was originally one universal soul, or oversoul, which, as it were, broke itself up and encased itself in individual bodies. All individual souls are, hence, fragments of the oversoul, so that although they are distinct from one another, they are in reality all one. Thus, to quote the Zohar, at the time when God desired to create the universe, it came up in his will before him, and he formed all the souls which were destined to be allotted to the children of men. The souls were all before him in the forms which they were afterwards destined to bear inside the human body. God looked at each one of them, and he saw that many of them would act corruptly in the world. When the time of each arrived, it was summoned before God, who said to it, Go to such and such a part of the universe, enclose thyself in such and such a body. But the soul replied, O sovereign of the universe, I am happy in my present world, and I desire not to leave it for some other place where I shall be enslaved and become soiled. Then the Holy One, blessed be he, replied, From the day of thy creation thou hast had no other destiny than to go into the universe whither I send thee. The soul, seeing that it must obey, sorrowfully took the way to earth and came down to dwell in our midst. EE 96. There is more than one echo of Plotinus, the mastermind of Neoplatonism, in this Zoharic extract. The world coming up in his will before him is Plotinus' teaching about God thinking out the original patterns of all things, the first manifestation of God being thought. The souls were all before him in the forms which they were afterwards destined to bear is clearly an allusion to the splitting up of the oversoul so that its fragments might get embodied in individuals, as Plotinus taught. But although the Zohar, like Plotinus, draws a distinction between lower souls, they who would act corruptly in the worlds, and higher souls, it, unlike Plotinus, makes every soul descend into some body. Plotinus has quite a different teaching. The lower soul desires a body and lives in the stage of sense. The higher soul, on the other hand, transcends the body, rides upon it, as the fish is in the sea or as the plant is in the air. This higher soul never absolutely leaves its home. Its being is not here but yonder, or in the language of Plotinus, the soul always leaves something of itself above. Rufus M. Jones, Studies in Mystical Religion, p. 74. According to the Zohar, while there are distinctions there too between superior and inferior souls, as is shown by their belonging to a higher or lower Sephira, they must all descend to earth and unite with the body, returning all of them at death to their fountainhead God. The Zohar is, after all, but a commentary on the Hebrew Bible, and however much it may at times forsake the traditional Jewish pathways in favor of alien philosophies, it is always strictly conservative where the fundamental axioms of the Jewish faith are concerned, that every body possesses a soul which in its pristine form is pure, that recompense in an afterlife awaits it on a scale commensurate with its deserts, is an impregnable tenet of Judaism. The Zohar, wherever it may wander, must come back to this central point. The soul is a trinity. It comprises three elements, viz. A neshama, the rational element, which is the highest phase of existence, ruah, the moral element, the seat of good and evil, the ethical qualities, nefesh, the gross side of spirit, the vital element, which is en rapport with the body, and the mainspring of all the movements, instincts, and cravings of the physical life. There is a strong reflection of Platonic psychology in these three divisions or powers of the soul. More than one medieval Jewish theologian was a Platonist, and in all probability the Zohar is a debtor to these. The three divisions of the soul are emanations from the Sephirot. The neshama, which, as has been said, is the soul in its most elevated and sublimest sense, emanates from the Sephira of wisdom. The ruah, which denotes the soul in its ethical aspect, emanates from the Sephira of beauty. The nefesh, which is the animal side of the soul, is an emanation from the Sephira of foundation, that element of divinity which comes, most of all, into contact with the material forces of earth. To sum up the matter in general and untechnical language, the three divisions or aspects of the human soul enable man to fit himself into the plan and framework of the cosmos, give him the power to do his multifarious duties towards the multifarious portions of the world which is a manifestation of God's thought, a copy of the celestial universe, an emanation of the divine. The Zohar puts it poetically thus: in these three, ruah, neshama, ruah, nefesh, we find an exact image, diukna, of what is above in the celestial world. For all three form only one soul, one being where all is one. The nefesh does not in itself possess any light. This is why it is so tightly joined to the body, acquiring for it the pleasures and the foods which it needs. It is of it that the sage says, she giveth meat to her household, and their task to her maidens. Proverbs XXI 15. Her household means the body which is fed. Her maidens are the limbs which obey the dictates of the body. Above the nefesh is the ruach, which dominates the nefesh, imposes laws upon it, and enlightens it as much as its nature requires. And then high above the ruach is the neshama, which in its turn rules the ruach and sheds upon it the light of life. The ruach is lit up by this light and depends entirely upon it. After death, the ruach has no rest. The gates of paradise, Eden, are not open to it until the time when neshama has reascended to its source, to the Ancient of the Ancients, in order to become filled with him throughout eternity. For the neshama is always climbing back again towards its source. It can be gathered from this passage, as from many similar ones which might have been usefully quoted had space allowed, that neshama has only realized that man only becomes conscious of neshama after death. A whole lifetime is necessary, and in some cases more than one lifetime, as we shall see, in order that neshama should be able to mount up again to the infinite source from which it emanated. And it is the inevitable destiny of neshama to climb back and become one with the Ancient of Ancients. But if neshama is so exalted, so sacrosanct, why should it have emanated from its immaculate source at all, to become tainted with earth? The Zohar anticipates our question and gives its answer as follows: If thou inquirest why it cometh down into the world from so exalted a place, and putteth itself at such a distance from its source, I reply thus: it may be likened to an earthly monarch to whom a son is born. The monarch takes the son to the countryside, there to be nourished and trained until such a time as he is old enough to accustom himself to the palace of his father. When the father is told that the education of his son is completed, what does he do out of his love for him? In order to celebrate his homecoming, he sends for the queen, the mother of the lad. He brings her into the palace and rejoices with her the whole day long. It is thus with the Holy One, blessed be he. He too has a son by the queen. This son is the high and holy soul. He conducts it to the countryside, to the world, in order to grow up there and gain an acquaintance with the customs appertaining to the royal palace. When the divine king perceives that the soul has completed its growth, and the time is ripe for recalling it to himself, what does he do out of his love for it? He sends for the queen, brings her into the palace, and brings the soul in too. The soul, forsooth, does not bid adieu to its earthly tenement before the queen has come to unite herself with it, and to lead it into the royal apartment where it is to live forever. And the people of the world are wont to weep when the son takes its leave of them. But if there be a wise man amongst them, he says to them, Why weep ye? Is he not the son of the king? Is it not meet that he should take leave of you to live in the palace of his father? It was for this reason that Moses, who knew the truth, on seeing the inhabitants of earth mourning for the dead, exclaimed, Ye are the children of the Lord your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. Juteph 1. If all good men knew this, they would hail with delight the day when it behooves them to bid adieu to the world. Is it not the height of glory for them when the queen comes down into the midst of them to lead them into the palace of the king to enjoy the delights thereof forevermore? I 245. It should be noted, by the way, that there are many instances in Talmudic literature of men seeing the Shekhinah at the hour of death. It is the signal of the return of neshama to its home, the oversoul, of which it is but a loosened fragment, and the return can only begin after it has completed its education within the life limits of an earthly body. It seems to follow, as a necessary corollary from the foregoing doctrine, that the Zohar must give countenance to some theory of the transmigration of souls. If it is imperative upon neshama to climb back again to the oversoul and obtain union with it, and if in order to effect this end it must previously have reached the summit of purity and perfection, then it stands to reason that its sojourn within the confines of one body may, on occasions, be inadequate to enable it to reach this high and exacting condition. Hence it must experience other bodies, and it must repeat the experience until such a time as it shall have elevated and refined itself to the pitch at which it will be able to become one again with the fountain from which it emanated. The Zohar does contain some such tenet as this, although for the full and systematic treatment of the subject one has to look to the Kabbalistic writers who built upon the Zohar. The Zohar states as follows: All souls must undergo transmigration, and men do not understand the ways of the Holy One, blessed be he. They know not that they are brought before the tribunal both before they enter into this world and after they leave it. They know not the many transmigrations and hidden trials which they have to undergo, nor do they know the number of souls and spirits, ruach and nefesh, which enter into the world, and which do not return to the palace of the heavenly King. Men do not know how the souls revolve like a stone which is thrown from a sling, but the time is drawing nigh when these hidden things will be revealed. E99. To the minds of the Kabbalists, transmigration is a necessity not alone on the grounds of their particular theology. The soul must reach the highest stage of its evolution before it can be received again into its eternal home, but on moral grounds as well. It is a vindication of divine justice to mankind. It settles the harassing query which all ages have propounded. Why does God permit the wicked to flourish as the green bay tree, whereas the righteous man is allowed to reap nothing but sorrow and failure? And the only way for reconciling the dismal fact of child suffering with the belief in a good God is by saying that the pain is a retribution to the soul for sin committed in some one or more of its previous states. As has been already mentioned, the Jewish literature of this subject of transmigration is an exceedingly rich one, but it lies outside the scope of the present book. Not only does the Zohar, as we have seen, teach the emanation of a threefold soul, but it also propounds a curious theory about the emanation of a pre-existent form or type of body, which in the case of each one of us, unites the soul with the body. It is one of the strangest pieces of Zoharic psychology extant, and the object is probably that of accounting on one and the same ground for the varying physical and psychical characteristics embedded in each of us from birth. The passage runs as follows. At the moment when the earthly union pre-ish takes place, the Holy One, blessed be He, sends to earth a form resembling a man, and bearing upon itself the divine seal. This image is present at the moment just mentioned, and if the eye could see what goes on then, it would detect above the heads an image like a human face. And this image is the model after which we are fashioned. It is this image which receives us first on our arrival into this world. It grows in us as we grow, and leaves us when we leave the world. This image is from above. When the souls are about to quit their heavenly abode, each soul appears before the Holy One, blessed be He, clothed with an exalted pattern on which are engraven the features which it will bear here below, 107. But of far greater consequence in the history of Jewish mysticism is the commanding place assigned by the Zohar to the idea of love. Indeed, Jewish mysticism is here but a reflection of the nature of the mysticism inherent in all other creeds. The soul's most visible, most tangible, most perceivable quality is love. The soul is the root of love. Love is the symbol of the soul. Mystic love, says Miss Underhill, is the offspring of the celestial Venus, the deep-seated desire and tendency of the soul towards its source. The soul, says the mystic of all ages, seeks to enter consciously into the presence of God. It can do so only under the spur of an overpowering ecstatic emotion called love. Although, according to the Zohar, the soul in its most exalted state as neshama can only enjoy the love inherent in its union with its source after it has freed itself from the contamination of earthly bodies. It is nevertheless possible, under certain conditions, to realize this ecstatic love while the soul is in the living body of an individual. One of these conditions is the act of serving God, the chief outward concomitant of which is prayer. Whosoever serves God out of love, says the Zohar, comes into union, itabak, with the place of the highest of this high, and comes into union too with the holiness of the world, which is to be Thurat 16. This is to say that the service of God, when effected with love, leads the soul into union with the place of its origin, and it gives it, as it were, a foretaste of the ineffable felicity which awaits it in its highest condition as neshama. The verse, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," Deuteronomy 4 hints, says the Zohar, at this blending of the soul into a unity. For this branch of its teaching, the Zohar is certainly not indebted to Neoplatonism or any other alien system. It got it from its Jewish predecessors, the Midrashic homilists who enriched the Jewish literature of the opening centuries of the Christian era with their mystic interpretations of the Song of Songs. Verses like, "I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine," Vi 3, served them as a starting point for their sermons on the nearness of man and God to one another, brought about by the instrumentality of love. When the soul has completed the cycle of its earthly career and hurries back to become blended with the oversoul, it revels in ecstasies of love, which the Zohar describes with a wealth of poetic phraseology. The soul is received in what is termed a treasury of life, or sometimes a temple of love, and one of its crowning joys is to contemplate the divine presence through a shining mirror. The rabbis of the Talmud and Midrashim use the same phrase. Thus, a passage in Leviticus Rabbah I-14 reads thus, "All the other prophets saw God through 9 shining mirrors, but Moses saw him through only one." All the other prophets saw God through a blurred mirror, but Moses saw him through a clear one. The meaning is that Moses had a clearer and nearer apprehension of the deity than all other prophets. Thus we read, "Come and see. When the souls have reached the treasury of life, they enjoy the shining of the brilliant mirror whose focus is in the heavens. And such is the brightness which emanates therefrom that the souls would be unable to withstand it, were they not covered with a coat of light. Even Moses could not approach it until he had stripped off his earthly integument." E66. Again, in one of the most mysterious and exalted parts of heaven, there is a palace called the Palace of Love. Deep mysteries are enacted there. There are gathered together all the most well-beloved souls of the heavenly King. It is there that the heavenly King, the Holy One, blessed be He, lives together with these holy souls and unites himself to them by kisses of love. E97. The Talmudic rabbis describe the way in which death comes to the righteous as death by a kiss. The Zohar defines this kiss as the union of the soul with its root, E68. There is, in fine, an exceptionally high degree of optimism encircling the Zohar's treatment of the soul. If the theology of the early rabbinic schools of Palestine and Babylon errs, as its critics say, in the direction of making Judaism too much of a rigid discipline, too much of a law-compelling outward obedience rather than inward feeling, the balance is redressed by the theology of the Zohar, which, by making the soul, on the completion of its earthly work, so great a partaker in the divine love, emphasizes the deep spirituality inherent in Judaism, the emotional element which it calls forth in those who rightfully and adequately put its teachings into practice. It thus imports an added brightness into Jewish life. It inspires the Jew with the conviction that a high destiny awaits him in the hereafter. It makes him put a premium upon virtue and encourages him to raise himself to the sublimest pitch of moral and religious worth. Judaism for the Jew can never be a mere soulless formalism so long as the Zohar's doctrine of divine love is an integral part of Judaism. Such a consummation is well attested by such a passage from the Zohar as the following. When Adam, our first father, dwelt in the Garden of Eden, he was clothed, as men are in heaven, with the divine light. When he was driven forth from Eden to do the ordinary work of earth, then Holy Writ tells us that the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife coats of skin and clothed them, for ere this they wore coats of light, of that light which belongs to Eden. Man's good deeds upon earth bring down on him a portion of the higher light which lights up heaven. It is that light which covers him like a coat when he enters into the future world and appears before his Maker, the Holy One, blessed be He. It is by means of such a covering that he can taste of the enjoyments of the elect and look upon the face of the shining mirror. And thus the soul, in order to become perfect in all respects, must have a different covering for each of the two worlds which it has to inhabit, one for the terrestrial world and the other for the higher world, EE 22 verses end. And this cheerful view of the soul is an incitement to nobler effort, not only for the Jew as an individual, but also for the Jew as a unit of a race which, according to scriptural prescription, looks forward to its highest evolution in the arrival of a Messiah. The Zohar, truly enough, is comparatively silent upon this theme, but the famous Kabbalist and mystic Isaac Luria, who is the chief expounder of the Zohar, and who carried many of its undeveloped dogmas to their logical conclusions, has elaborated this point in a strikingly ingenious and original way. Luria held a peculiar theory of the transmigration of the soul, and conjoined with this there went, what might appear to some, an approach to Christian teaching about the truth of original sin. With the Zohar, Luria maintained that man, by means of his soul, unites the upper and the lower world. But he maintained further that with the creation of Adam, there were created at the same time all the souls of all races of mankind. Just as there are variations in the physical qualities of men, so there are corresponding variations in their souls. Hence there are souls which are good and souls which are bad, and souls of all the shades of value which lie between these two extremes. When Adam sinned, there was confusion in all these classes of souls. The good souls became tainted with some of the evil inherent in the bad souls, and, on the contrary, the bad souls received many an admixture of goodness from the superior souls. But who emanated from the inferior sets of soul? According to Luria, the pagan world. Israel, however, issued from the superior souls. But again, seeing that the good souls are not wholly good, nor the bad souls wholly bad by reason of the confusion ensuing upon Adam's fall, it follows that there can be no real unalloyed good in the world. Evil infests some spot or other everywhere. A perfect condition of things will only come with the coming of the Messiah. Until that time, therefore, all souls, tainted as they all inevitably are with sin, must, by means of a chain of transmigrations from one body to another, shake off more and more of the dross clinging to them until they reach that summit of purity and perfection when, as neshama, they can find their way back to unite with the infinite source, the oversoul. Hence, the individual Jew, in promoting the growth of his own soul, is really promoting the collective welfare of his race. Upon the weal or woe of his own soul hangs the weal or woe of his people. Luria's arguments, when fully stated, have a decided air of the fantastic about them, but that his conclusion is sound and valuable, no one will doubt. He encourages the Jew to the pursuit of a lofty communal or national ideal. He reminds him, too, of the imperative necessity of Israel's solidarity. For the Jew, taking his stand upon many a text in the Old Testament, has always felt that his thought and his work must not be for himself alone. His prayer has ever been for the well-being of Israel rather than for the well-being of individual Israelites. What he counts in God's sight as a separate entity is small in comparison with what he counts as an inseparable unit in the compact body of Israel. In this voluntary, self-forgetful merging of the smaller interests of the part in the greater interests of the whole lies much of the secret of the long roll of Israel's saints and heroes, his martyrs and his mystics. Concluding note, the course of Jewish mysticism subsequent to the Zohar consists in the main of developments and elaborations by Jews in many lands of the doctrines taught in that unique work. There is an enormous fund of originality in many of these elaborations. Their writers were men ingrained with the deepest of mystical sentiments, men whose lives accorded with the high strain of their teachings, and whose writings constitute a material addition for all time to the body of Jewish spiritual literature. But limits of space prevent the consideration of this subject. At the beginning of the 18th century, there arose among the Jews of Poland a great religious movement known as Hasidism, from Hebrew hasid, pious. Its aim was to revive the spiritual element in Judaism, which had been largely crushed out of existence by the dead weight of rabbinical formalism. Hasidism was invented in order to show that Judaism meant not merely law and commandment, ritual and dogma, but denoted also the emotions of love and aspiration and faith felt towards a Father who was eternally near and whose heart overflowed with the Father's compassion for his children. Hasidism strove to effect for Judaism the supremacy of inward first-hand religion over the dogmatism of outward traditionalism. Judaism needed this corrective, and although Hasidism is often flouted as a failure, and its adherents depreciated as the devotees of excess and extravagance in religious exercise, it nevertheless was a force and deserves an abiding place in the history of Jewish theology, if only on the ground that it tried to do for Judaism what the general mystical tendencies of our own day are more and more doing for it, viz., to make it conscious of how dominating a part is played in it by the inner impulse urging us to seek and to find a pathway to the realized presence of God. Bibliography. Works in English are unfortunately very few. On the whole subject of the mystical elements in Talmudic, Midrashic, and Kabbalistic theology, the student should see Merkabah, Kabbalah, Philadelphia, 1888. Carpe, Études sur les origines et la nature du Zohar, Paris, 1901. Joel, Essays on Ibn Gabirol in his Beiträge zur Geschichte der Philosophie, 1876. All of the above works contain many translations of the original Hebrew and Aramaic. On the subject of the Essenes, Great's History of the Jews, English trans, Vol. U, pp. 1634. Ginsburg, The Essenes, Their History and Their Doctrines, London, 1864. Article Essenes by F.C. Conybeare in Hastings Dictionary of the Bible. Article Essenes in Jewish Encyclopedia. Philos, The Contemplative Life, ed. Conybeare, Oxford, 1895. On the Jewish Hellenistic Literature. Schurer, Geschichte des jüdischen Volkes im Zeitalter Jesu Christi. E. pp. 556-554. Freudenthal, Hellenistische Studien, 879. Gerald Friedlander, Hellenism and Christianity, London, 1912. C.G. Montefiore, The Wisdom of Solomon, London, 1891. On Philo, Drummond, Philo Judaeus, London, 1888. On Shekhinah, Memra, Holy Spirit, Volz, Der Geist Gottes, Tübingen, 1910. Abelson, The Immanence of God in Rabbinical Literature, London, 1912. On the Yetzirah book. Parts of it are translated into English in W. Westcott's Sefer Yetzirah, London, 1893, and into French in Carpe's Études sur les origines et la nature du Zohar, Paris, 1901. On the doctrines of emanation and the 10 Sephiros, Joel in the work previously mentioned. It contains the best account of the relation between Jewish and Neoplatonic mysticism. Ehrenpreis, Die Entwicklung der Emanationslehre in der Kabbalah des 13. Jahrhunderts, Frankfurt, 1895. This work is indispensable p. 179 for the history of the development of ideas. Eliphaz Levi, Le Livre de Splendeur, Paris, 1894. A translation of the whole of the Zohar into French by the late Jean de Pauli has recently been published. It is absolutely indispensable as the only complete translation yet attempted. The end. Back to top. Haggadah is the general name for the narrative or fabular or philosophical sections of the rabbinic literature. Literally, house of judgment, the technical name for a Jewish court of law. There were 4 such worlds in the medieval Kabbalah. They will be alluded to further on. Sandalphon, Greek Synadelphos, co-brother. Memra is the Aramaic for word. For the full theological significance of the Memra, see the author's Immanence of God in Rabbinical Literature, pp. 146 to 173. The rabbis in TB Nedarim 38a give some curious illustrations of Moses' wealth, strength, and wisdom, all deduced from Old Testament verses. Philo says, "For what life can be better than that which is devoted to speculation? Or what can be more closely connected with rational existence? For which reason it is that though the voices of mortal beings are judged of by the faculty of hearing, nevertheless the Scriptures present to us the words of God to be actually visible to us like light. For in them it is said that all the people saw the voice of God." Exodus, XX 18. They do not say heard it, since what took place was not a beating of the air by means of the organs of the mouth and tongue, but a most exceedingly brilliant ray of virtue, not different in any respect from the source of reason, which also in another passage is spoken of in the following manner. Ye have seen that I spake unto you from out of heaven, Ibid 22. Not ye have heard for the same reason, on the migration of Abraham, Ix. One of the favorite names for God in the medieval Kabbalah. It is based on the phrase in Daniel, Vith 9:13-22, Ancient of Days. Some authorities invert the order of F and G. From the Authorized Daily Prayer Book, Ed. Singer, p. 129, Ziv, in Hebrew, a mystical term for the shining of the Shekhinah, another appellation for Hesed, the 4th Sephirah. In Hebrew, there is a great similarity in sound between the word for skin and the word for light. All rights reserved. LD Kleisem, footer year const URL document.eres, if URL.katestirkt, new date eres. Mobile nav toggle, const toggle, document queercelestirk.eres, nav toggle, const menu, ldocument.eres, nav menu. If toggle and menu, toggle and instrument click, la, const expanded, toggle attribute area expanded, true, toggle attribute area expanded, string ek expanded. Menu clease list, toggle is open, la close menu when a link is tapped / click menu, la snisterin click, la if e-target and can e-target naknagoves, toggle attribute area expanded false. Menu clease list remove is open, la const back to top, document.eres back to top. If back to top window linisterin scroll, la if window scrolly May 400, back to top clease list add is visible, else back to top clease list remove is visible. Back to top linisterin click, window scrudel, la a2 ol stat counter code for global gray HTTPS, var s visible 1, var scrum of link 1,